And I'm super excited today to bring on Jenny Fielding, who is an amazing speaker in herself. If you follow the venture community, right, it's probably been pretty hard for you to not see Jenny's face and to not be hearing about Everywhere Ventures across these last couple of years, because Everywhere Ventures, I believe it was called the Fund first, right?
Yeah, it was a bit of a rebrand. When we started
Was
it,
the fund hard to hand out or to stick out and
I mean,
be?
honestly, we SEO'd quite well, which is very funny. But when we
Yeah,
started our fund, probably like many people watching this, it was really an experiment. And so the
yep.
experiment was, can founders and operators become LPs, the people that give us money, and then produce, deal flow and access to founders that would provide outsized returns. And so we ran this as an experiment, 2 iterations. So we raised kind of 2 funds under the brand, the fund. And then at the end of, I guess about 2021, we kind of looked at each other. We're like, wow, this is like really working. So we have some
Mhm.
incredible companies in our first fund, our second fund. And we just thought like, okay, why don't we find a brand that really matches our ethos? So my co-founder, Scott Hartley, and I have spent our careers building companies and investing in companies around the world. Our thesis is that we believe innovation's everywhere and we want to be where the best founders are, wherever they are. And so that means getting on planes and going to far-flung places to meet founders, to get to know them, and to bring them into our ecosystem. So obviously it was very heartening when I saw your chat and like people are literally, I'm in Nigeria and I'm in Sao Paulo and I'm in Canada. So that's like, totally our jam. And that just like really gets me excited. So amazing to see everyone dialing in from around the world.
Yeah, no, and it's amazing. So yes, Everywhere Ventures, very much probably better described than just the fund, right?
Yeah.
Um, so it's a rebrand that, and you also have a book called Venture Everywhere. So something kind of reaching these different markets that maybe are overlooked by other investors is something that you're very passionate about. I remember when we spoke last week, you said you had just come back from like 6 weeks in Europe or something like that, right? So you are literally physically going everywhere um, to meet some of these founders. Like, why do you? And we very much believe this too, right? Founder Institute, we believe that there's entrepreneurial talent is everywhere, right? Talent is distributed, but not necessarily access, right? For you guys, like, what why do you think that a lot of investors are just not kind of wising up to that game, right? You think mostly with investors, it's, hey, you're trying to sort of find market inefficiencies, right? You're trying to look in places that maybe other people aren't, rather than trying to bid on the next highest, the next hottest AI startup where the numbers are just going insane, right? Like, why do you think a lot of these investors are overlooking some of these non-traditional markets?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look historically, right, to the origin of Silicon Valley and what was actually being invested in and cultivated that silicon, like, well, where was it coming from, right? It wasn't coming from international waters. It was much more of a local business. And so the kind of mindset started, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, really around silicon and investing in things that were in their backyard. And so I think, a lot of industries just develop around culture and around history, right? Why do we have finance in New York? Why do we have,
Yeah.
Hollywood and all of that? And so once you kind of get into a groove, it becomes the norm. And so we saw this mentality of investors on Sand Hill Road in California really not wanting to invest, they used to say, further than a 25 mile radius because they could drive to a board meeting,
From Sand Hill Road.
yeah, from Sand Hill Road in
Okay.
a pretty short time. And I think, over the last decade, we've started to see that culture and that methodology really erode. And we're seeing interesting founders pop up around the world. And no, you can't drive to them in 25 minutes. But it seems pretty crazy to overlook that if you also believe that there are pockets of innovation everywhere, and that if you can connect the capital, which might be still constrained in certain places, to
Yep.
those founders, well, you can create multi-generational companies. Now, I saw that on a small scale. So I built 2 companies in New York City. And people kind of roll their eyes and they're like, yeah, but that's New York. I mean, let me tell you, in 2007, 2008, what it was like to start a company here. Everyone thought you were crazy. If you were going
In
to
New
build
York.
software, you
Yep.
had to go to New York City. There was no venture capitalist here. And so even a place like New York was really not ideal. But many of us kind of OG folks who started out building companies here, dug our heels in and looked around and said, there might not be venture capital here, but there's a lot of capital. So we could tap into, pockets, whether it was real estate or finance people. There was incredible engineers and talent. Every multinational was here. So I think we're all expecting, innovation to be global from day one. And I think we also have to realize that these things take a while. And so some of these nascent ecosystems are just going to take kind of a generation, which might be 10 or 20 years to become as
Yeah.
robust as some of the more established ones. And, so we saw that in New York, it did take quite a while. And now New York's second largest ecosystem. And we're just seeing, amazing places flourish around the world.
And I can echo that too because I built a startup in New York in 2005 and it was sold in 2007. Yeah, and again, it was New York, but it was challenging because you were dealing with, yes, there's like you said, there's money there, there's real estate money, there's Wall Street money, but it's just a totally different mindset when it comes to venture, right? And that was one of the biggest things that we had an issue with, right? Was that we're trying to run a startup, but then we have people who come from Wall Street who was just a different mindset, right? And
100%.
and I think I was just in Colombia and I was seeing a lot of the same thing where there's a ton of money there, whether it's coming from mining or commercial real estate, right, booming market. But again, it's like when those people start to talk venture, it becomes really challenging. So it's a cultural shift that sometimes can take a long time, but it also presents an opportunity for investors to go into those markets and see that no, like this is an amazing team, right? I think COVID drove opportunity for so many more entrepreneurs all around the world. AI tools are doing that as well, right? To really stick out. What are some of the markets that you have seen? And I know that you guys are going everywhere, right? But are there a couple specific markets that you've really been impressed with? Um, that obviously you've probably invested one or two companies maybe in some of these markets, but you really are bullish on just the types of talent that you're seeing there, the culture, the drive.
Yeah. So, as the name suggests, we do invest globally. One of my favorite markets, though, is Latam. And I think it has this kind of, rich mix of people that want to hustle, that are very
Yeah,
resilient, that are not kind of entitled or expecting things. It has incredible talent and like actually big markets. And so, although the
yeah,
startup scene might be smaller than in the US, I think LATAM has like a huge potential. I'm even more excited about it now because kind of during COVID 2020, 2021, there were a lot of US investors that went there. And slowly they've kind of retreated. Now they went
yeah.
there for a few reasons. They saw opportunity, but they also saw more attractive valuations, and some other arbitrage. I think now that the market has cooled, they're kind of refocusing on the US, and that's left, a little bit less capital there, which is not great for entrepreneurs, but it's been very fruitful for us to invest in places like Mexico and Brazil in particular.
Yeah, exactly. During COVID, when money was flush,
Right.
and we see a similar dynamic like in Africa too, for example, right? Like that's probably one of our strongest growth markets across Founder Institute. We're just seeing amazing companies coming out of Ghana, of Ivory Coast, of Nigeria, and it was the same kind of thing where during COVID, a lot of people pushed money in there, and then we've just seen it retreat, right?
100%. And we've done
But
a fair amount in Nigeria, in South Africa. And it has been pretty stark to see the retreating of capital. But it'll come back. I think
yeah,
that, the thing that you and I know as someone that started a company, 20 years ago as well, is that we see these things in cycles. And so ecosystems don't get built in a night, they don't get destroyed in a night, and that, the founders will have to, persevere, and the capital, will come.
yeah, for sure. And I just want to just give a quick note, guys. We are going to try to pepper in some questions from the audience. So if you do have any questions, please do throw them in to the chat. Actually, with this volume, it's probably better to throw them into the Q&A tool that we have in here. And the team will kind of feed those into me, and I'll try to pepper those in because I know that we'd love to get some of your personal questions over to Jenny as well throughout this conversation. So, um, so you're looking at companies around the world. You're going to all these different markets, and you guys try to be, and in a lot of cases, the first money in, right, or one of the first checks in the pre-seed stage. I think your standard check is 250K. Is that
Correct.
correct? Um, and we know that at that point it's hard to evaluate these companies, right? I mean, comparatively, Series A, Series B investors, right? They have no shortage of data points and all types of things, and they can really go in there and crunch your data and evaluate, at a very, very high level of certainty, like kind of what the company looks like. In the beginning, it's a lot harder. There's a lot less data. And I know there was a quote that we had saw that from a recent interview where were talking about, I think the quote was that venture capital is not really about finance, it's about psychology, right? And I think that's really, I mean, I think it's applicable in a couple of ways, right? It's applicable in kind of evaluating companies, it's applicable in helping them grow after you've invested. But I'd love for you to dive a little bit more into that because I think it could be really helpful for founders too, who, are trying to go out and raise capital when maybe they don't have the metrics, especially at that pre-seed first check kind of stage, like how, yeah, like what is the type of psychology? What do you mean by that? And what are the things that you're sort of looking for, as data points when traditional data points like financial metrics, et cetera, are going to be scarce?
Yeah. So, I mean, any company at the early stage kind of has these three attributes. They have, their, let's call it like their momentum. So we won't call it traction, but like somehow they have their momentum, they have their team, and then they have like product market fit, or, they have a kind of a fit in the market. Well, none of the early companies have product market fit. So like we can't look at numbers or we can't look at data. So like let's strip that away. Many of them don't have a lot of momentum. And so like the really, when you're peeling the onion, there's like the sector that they're in. So you may or may not be interested in the sector, but then the only thing left is the founder. Right. And
Yeah.
so we try to spend time with founders, sometimes over weeks, sometimes over months, sometimes over years, just getting to know them, getting to know what drives them, what their psychology is, what their mission is, and how that may or may not align to like where we see the world. So I think it's fine not to have traction or momentum, not to have, your go to market figured out, or product market fit. Like we're not expecting that. But the thing that you can control is really like, how do you show up for your company and yourself, right? And so we tend to over index on people that we think have resilience, that have had experiences in their past that have made them more kind of battle tested. I talk about in my book this idea of elasticity, which
Yeah.
is, being able to respond to the situation that's being presented to you, which may not always be, straightforward. And so, how do you do that? And so we try to spend time, understanding who these people are as humans, because we think that that will kind of drive where the company is going. Now, the company might pivot, and that's totally fine. It probably will.
Sure.
There'll be bumps along the road, but how you respond in those, those tough moments, I think, says a lot. And this is not going to be a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 year journey. This is going to be like a 10 to 15-year journey. Like that's actually the reality if you have success. So what's going to get you through those years? Because there's going to be times when, it just things are not going well. That might be your team, that might be shifts in the market, your technology, and your product. And so what's going to kind of get you through? So those are the things that we're looking for. And I think that lends itself really well, especially for international markets, because a lot of
Yeah.
those folks have not grown up in, some of the privilege that maybe folks in the US have had, or in certain communities. And so, we love meeting those founders who have these like great rich stories of how, they became entrepreneurial and how they have taken, themselves into a better situation. And I think that's really inspiring. So we try to look for those individuals and like index on that mentality.
And this is something that we measure too, and we literally see this where It's something that we measure through social science, which is like determination. Right now, we call it determination, but it's a collection of a couple different traits
Yeah.
that we think sort of go up to that. And you see that, yeah, U.S. is among the lowest, right? Worldwide. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're not determined. It just means that, yeah, it's sort of this theory, it's like we haven't had it as hard as some of these other markets, right? So they bring these other tangible skills to the to the table that maybe aren't necessarily you know immediately visible until you kind of see how they act, like sort of under duress, right? It's not how they
100%.
act when things are rosy, it's when things are challenging,
I
right?
think the challenge is like, well, how do you kind of test for that in a short period of time or really understand it?
Yeah.
And for us, there's kind of big ways that are kind of like big flags, red flags or green flags. And then there are like more subtle ways. So like a more subtle way, just to be very tactical here, is like, as you're getting your financing together, like how are you approaching dealing with your lawyers and this kind of negotiation between your investors and all of that? And it says a lot about founders. Like, do they just kind of push it off to a third party, who's like, okay, you deal with it? Are they kind
Right.
of in the weeds? Are they afraid to have uncomfortable conversations about, pro rata, about co-founders, all these kinds of things? And so I think you can kind of like get to, again, the psychology, if you kind of dig down a bit.
Right, how they're handling those difficult conversations. And I love the term elasticity too, right? Because another term that a lot of people use is like grit, right? But I think there's a subtle difference between elasticity and grit, right? Grit is really kind of more like, okay, like how tough are you necessarily, right? Whereas elasticity, it's something that we talk about a lot, right? It's like there's always this fine line with founders where you want them to sort of stand their ground and be have conviction, right? But at the same time, they also have to be somewhat flexible, coachable, right? Is the word that a lot of investors will look for, and I think elasticity kind of perfectly sums that up, right? It shows that, okay, well, yeah, they have a vision, like they have conviction. They're not just gonna kind of flop in the wind and do everything an investor tells them to do just because the investor's telling them to do it, right? But they have the ability to be flexible in those moments as well. And elasticity obviously brings, it's like bouncing back from hard things,
And
right?
sometimes it might be, very unexpected. So in my book, I interview a founder who its team was primarily based in Ukraine. And when the war broke out, one of the things that
Yeah.
he had to do, obviously, he was a CEO of, or he is the CEO of an ed tech company. This was really not in the job description, but he had many international employees who all of a sudden were kind of literally stuck in a war torn country. And he had to physically go around in his car, pick these people up, and drive them to the border. Right. So let's talk about what leadership means in those times. Right. So he was supporting his business and he's literally physically supporting his employees. So that ability to switch gears and be elastic to the situation that presents itself is pretty important in startups, because you're just going to be thrown all of these kind of black swan moments that no one ever told you about, and it's like how you show up, right, and how you deal with that, because I think many people would have crawled into a hole, right? So yeah, I think there's great examples of that are a little bit less traditional than like, okay, well, how do we reorchestrate the P&L? There are things that are
Right.
just kind of more core. And so how do we get to the heart of that as we're meeting people early on in their journey?
Yeah, and there's no shortage. I mean, God willing, not a lot of people have to deal with a good amount of their team being in a war-torn country, but there's always going to be these situations that pop up that sort of like are not. There's no handbook for, right? And sure, like you can have mentors and stuff to help guide you through it, but a lot of these things are so unique that, yeah, it's just the founder's ability to just really get in there, get their hands dirty, and deal with
Yeah.
these types of
And like
situations.
one of my tactical pieces of advice is like, as you're meeting investors and stakeholders in your business, is like, don't be afraid to show that, right? I think that there's a lot of, like pretense about running a startup, that you should have it all together and that you should be this fearless leader. And I think showing and really expressing times when things didn't go as planned and how you responded is a very powerful way to, one, build trust quickly with an investor, or really anyone, an employee,
Yeah.
or anyone, but also to kind of just show how you respond in adversarial times, right? And so I think those are good things in a kind of respectful or appropriate way to really express, as opposed to like, I've got this all figured out. Because at the beginning, no one has this all figured out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's totally fine for a founder, and this I see wrong a lot too. It's totally fine for a founder to say, I don't know, right? A lot of times, like I'll be in a conversation, I'll ask them something, and instead of saying I don't know, you can just kind of see they just start to quickly go rambling and pull out different data points and all this stuff. They're kind of
Yeah.
trying to think on the fly, and I'm just like, okay, so you don't know. It's okay, you don't know, right? Like you're not
Yeah, I
expected
think
to know everything.
another way that, when you don't know something, is really just to say like, well, here's how, like, I'm thinking about it now.
Yeah,
This is
yeah,
obviously needs more thought, or like, I'd have to kind of come back to you the more thoughtful way, but like, this is kind of a framework of how I think. I think that's also helpful.
yeah, for sure. And I have a question here, and it's an extension, right? Because right now we're sort of talking about like the founder. Sophia from Cyprus, or Sofa from Cyprus, welcome Sofa, is asking like, more from like a team concept, right? So when you're looking at sort of this, psychology, elasticity of the founders, how does that also apply like in the team concept? Is that something that you're looking for between team members when you start to meet them and look at them, and at least as an indicator to maybe how the longevity that a company may have?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Primarily, we spend time with the founders at the earliest stages. Mostly, there isn't much more there. There might have one other employee, but these are very, very early stage companies. So we're
Sure.
truly trying to understand the founders. But to that point, we like to have the founders. We like to meet them together, or at least on a Zoom, virtually meet them, and kind of see how they interact. Right? Do they interrupt each other? Do they complement each other? Do they have the shared vision? We like to ask them really kind of pointed, tough questions, like, why does one of you have a certain amount of equity and the other have a different, and see how they respond, right? So I think the way that you interact with your teammates is super important. It's definitely hard for us doing diligence quickly, getting to know, to like really understand a whole team if you do happen to have a larger team. But I think once you start raising series A's and B's, that's something that investors will do. They'll spend a fair amount of time with team members, understanding like, do you think that the leadership is the right leadership? Do you think that the vision is the right vision? And what they're really looking for is alignment, right? Alignment with the
Yep.
team is a very powerful thing. So I think the more that you can be aligned with your co-founder or anyone on your team, the stronger that you will present.
For sure. And I'm going to get the next topic we're going to get into here a little bit is kind of the current funding landscape and some other tips for founders, which I know is going to be very, very enlightening for a lot of people here. But I just want to get to two other quick questions. So maybe this one is a good one to just kind of wrap up, like, okay, like the founder profile archetype that you guys are typically looking for. Aziza from Minneapolis is asking, like, what would you say is like the profile of a leader? How would you define leadership? Kind of a tough question, but I'm, yeah, just wondering maybe in a word, how you would tackle that.
I mean, for us, leadership is getting people aligned around a vision, right? So at the early stages, you're not going to be able to spend money to hire, right? Like Google will
Yep.
always, scoop up the best talent for the most amount of money. And the only thing that you can compete for is your vision, right?
Right.
It's equity on your cap table and the vision that you present. So for me, leadership is being able to clearly articulate that vision and get people willing to give up hundreds of thousands of dollars going to work at Google or, OpenAI, and say, like, I also believe in this vision and I want to do the craziest thing that someone can do, which is walk away from something safe to run this crazy thing called a startup, right? And so to
Right.
me, that's real leadership. And anyone that will do that for another person, like, that's a pretty big statement. So for me, that's really what leadership is. And then you really are empowering your team, right? And you're activating them to act as kind of owners, right? Because you want everyone in your team to care as much as you do. And so if
Yep.
you can kind of really imbue that feeling of this is a mission, this is what we were put on earth to do, I think you can get a lot of people, like-minded people, to join you on the journey. And those first early employees and team members are just so critical.
I love it. Yeah. Defining and having super, super clarity on what is the deeper purpose of what we're doing here. Why is it worth doing? And also just how is everybody's work contributing to that? Right. Yeah. I think that's brilliant. And then one last thing here, and I know that we were talking that you guys get something like 1,000 inbound pitches a month, I think you were saying. So if anybody here did want to submit or get in contact with you about their startup, what would be the best way to do it, number one? And then number two, any quick tip to like stand out?
Yeah. So, I mean, we have a submission on our website, and that's a great place to start. And those do get, reviewed. I'd say, like, the first place to start is just with any investor is like review their content, not just on their website, but things that they're interested in investing in, talking about.
Yeah.
We get so many submissions that are just out of our thesis, right? And so that just like wastes your time. And I just wouldn't recommend like crafting me, a very thoughtful email, but you're raising a $5 million seed. Like, we don't do that. Or something in consumer, like, we actually just don't invest in that. So the best, thing you can do is just like spend time on the front end researching who the best investors are for you based on things that they're actually investing in. And there's a lot of great tools out there, whether it's Crunchbase or PitchBook or CB Insights, where you can actually do research on these investors, not just what they say in the headline of their website. You can actually see what they're investing in, how much money they're putting in, are they leading rounds? Like, all this information is out there. It's just not in one spreadsheet. You have to kind of aggregate it and become the expert. And so that's what I would recommend. But yes, our website is good. If you want to send me, a direct email, it's j@everywhere.vc. I get about 400 to 500 emails a day. So unfortunately, can't get back to everyone. But if you do think that you're a perfect everywhere company based on things I've talked about, what it says on the website, et cetera, please be in touch. Um, and yeah, I think that's just a good methodology for anyone that you're trying to get in touch with. Just craft a well thought out, relevant, short,
Yeah.
concise email about why this could be a good fit.
Yeah. Cold outreach to VCs can work, guys. It's just it has to be super targeted, right? So again, you're at the right stage, you're within what they care about, the topics that they're talking about, et cetera. You're within their investment thesis essentially. And keep it short and sweet too. That's the other thing, right? Is like, most busy people aren't going to be able to read any email that's more than like 4 or 5 sentences, right? Get
Yeah,
to the
and
point.
actually, this is a fun fact. So we have a couple hundred founder LPs that are really the source of our deal flow. So mostly we
Yeah.
get our inbound from that community of people, and if you can connect with one of them, that's always a great channel into our, into us. But obviously, we do also look at colds, and the top company in our current fund was a company that reached out cold on LinkedIn to both my co-founder and myself. I didn't catch it because I'm getting like a lot of LinkedIn messages. My co-founder did, ended up having a call. We ended up, just thinking this was an incredible company. We invested, and that company is closing a very large Series A right now. It will make
Nice.
it our top performing company in our fund. So that came in cold. So there is, good reason to do cold. But I think the lesson there is really sometimes can't just expect, you put it into the ether and it comes back. That founder wrote like really good LinkedIn requests to both my co-founder and myself separate. And, I missed mine, very typical of me. My co-founder caught it. So you have to be persistent as well, I think, is the message.
Yep. And I probably wouldn't have it as your only strategy, right?
Yeah, for sure, for
Like,
sure.
yeah, don't just go in with cold. You still need to try to build up connectors, try to build relationships and all that kind of stuff, and put content out there too, which I want to get to in a second. That kind of makes you a thought leader in your space. So, the second topic here, and keep the questions coming, guys. I'm going to try to pepper them in. Is really just tips for founders, right? So right now, God, I don't even know what to call the investing market right now, right? It has gone through all types of transformations these last couple of years, but from specifically kind of like this first check and the pre-seed environment of what you're seeing, like, have you been seeing a lot of significant changes kind of in the benchmarks that are required now for people to successfully raise a pre-seed round, and any of the big changes that you've seen recently over the last year or two?
Yeah, so I'd say, there's pre-seed and there's seed. We've seen big
Yep.
changes in seed, and I'd say the momentum and traction you need for seed is pretty significant. So with a
Yep.
typical SaaS company, I mean, you're going to need like pretty significant growth rate and approaching 1 million ARR. That's a huge change. But in the
Yep.
US, those seed rounds are anywhere between $4 and $6 million. So maybe they're the old Series A's. So maybe that actually makes sense. Now,
Yeah.
pre-seed is interesting because going back to what I said originally, you kind of only have these levers to toggle. You have your team, you have your sector that you're in, and then you have your traction or momentum, and that's all you have. And so it kind of like the answer is really like it depends. So if you have this incredible team, you guys just spun out of Google's AI lab, and you have no traction, and you're in a good market, like that round is going to get done.
Yep.
If you're in a less favorable sector, maybe that's ed tech, and your team has never worked in ed tech before, but you actually have some traction because you've been hustling, you've been selling into schools or whatever it may be, like that deal also might get done. So you have to think about those three buckets, and you have to look very critically at yourself and say, which of these do I actually have? And depending what you have, it will determine the ease of your pre-seed funding round. Now, that's just how it is right now. So if you're in a hot sector, you might not need the other two buckets, which is this like amazing team with industry expertise and
Right.
traction. If you're in a less exciting sector, like you're probably going to need one or two of those other things, like this team that just knows where the bodies are buried and has crushed it before, or you just happen to have momentum. So you have to like just do an evaluation of yourself and think like, okay, like, am I in a market that's not just like a hot market? I'm working in AI, but like, am I in a big market, right? Am I in something that other investors are looking into that are, you see a lot of activity in that. And so you have those three things to toggle, and that's kind of all you have. And so I always just say, like, it depends if your pre-seed is going to get done. From a practical point of view, you want to up those chances. And so the best thing that you can do is like broaden your top of the funnel for investors. So that deal is like probably not going to get done if you only talk to 10 investors. Like it's a hard market.
Yep.
But if your top of the funnel is 100 investors and you've qualified these people and you've figured out like how I can get to each one, I'd say like your deal's probably going to get done. So, these are the levers that you have as founders, and you just have to be very honest about it. And you have to kind of know where your leverage is and where your strengths are.
Yeah, persistence, I'd say, right, is a huge thing. We're telling people you have to be ready to get like 100 no's, right? And that can be soul crushing, by the
So,
way. To keep after a couple of no's, maybe it's your third no of the day. Now you're on the fourth call, and now you got to turn on the Zoom and just be, all right, I'm ready to go again, right? Like it can be tough, but persistence helps. And the other thing too that I want to point out there, right, like you said, is that each company's going to have their own kind of, USPs, so to stand, right? Like okay, here are the things that we want to lead with and highlight because we see this as our strengths. And I still see so many startups who just go, they look at like the old Airbnb pitch deck and they just use that as a template, right? And it's like, I'll see, I think in that pitch deck, like the team slide was like last or something, right? But like you said, it's like a team, it's like a startup that where the team is like kick ass and they've done this before and they have all the right contacts into the right industries and stuff, but it's the last slide. So you really need to be looking at that narrative, right? And how to present yourself to investors in a way that's really highlighting your strengths, right?
100%. Yeah.
Um, I know that's and this has always been sort of a truism where, and I don't know if it's been a truism, but it's just sort of a natural extension of the venture environment, right? It's like bigger is better, scale, 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 grow, grow, grow. Especially, coming out of this bubble that we had in the post-COVID landscape. But I know in some recent speaking engagements and stuff, you've really been pushing against that, against this sort of like, raise more faster um, religion. And I'd love to hear, from your perspective, because I think this will be enlightening to a lot of founders, right? Because I think that's sort of the default. It's like, hey, like let's just raise as much money as we possibly can, right? Could you explain a little bit further as to why you think like that can be dangerous in some cases, and how it could, in some cases, do more harm than good?
Yeah, I think money can be a trap in a few ways. One is that it can make your team kind of lazy and or over reliant on this thing called venture capital, which historically had been used as an accelerant and has somehow repositioned itself as a way to put people in business and keep them in business
Yep.
potentially without any metrics.
Yep.
So I think, too much money can be a trap. And we obviously saw that, and I'm old enough and been building companies, investing in companies, for long enough that it's not just the 2020, 2021 vintage. We saw this, but we've seen this in the .com and we've seen this in crypto and a few of the other kind of cycles that we've been through. But if you look at the last one, 2020, 2021, where capital was incredibly cheap, it was easy to raise money and there was an abundance of it. And with that extra money, we didn't actually see better companies coming out of it, more generational, impact. We
Yep.
actually just saw a lot of money being, go up in flames, and there were a lot of investors. Ultimately, it is the founder's responsibility, but we did see a lot of investors pushing that narrative, right? If you can outspend other people, then you can get ahead, and I think that's a really tough positioning to have. We haven't seen it work too well, and we are starting to see it again with AI, right? So
Yep.
the with the most amount of money are now slated to kind of win the race. And I think there could be a lot of money lost and a lot of disappointment there, even with some of the big folks. So I'd say raise enough money that you have 24 months of runway. So that's a little bit of a change. It used to be 12 months, maybe 18 months. I'd say make sure that you feel confident that this money can last, because it might take you longer to get to your next milestone. And you might
Right.
not be able to raise again. So you need time to adjust your model so you can, own your own destiny, so to speak. So I think you need to raise enough for that, but don't raise too much that you can do too many experiments or that you can feel like you can overhire and all those things. Because quite honestly, it's not necessarily going to make you faster and better. And we kind of saw in the extreme pullback of 2022 when teams got cut in half, oftentimes their productivity went up. Right. And so there's a
Yep.
lot of data on that as well. That, over investing in a team at an early stage, especially pre product market fit, can be, a real hazard and doesn't necessarily let you accelerate, faster. So I'd say, money can be a trap. It can be a real accelerant, and it can be a de-accelerant to your business.
And the more money you raise, the more pressure, generally speaking, you're going to have from investors to kind of spend that money quickly, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of investors that say, "Oh, we have all this much money in the bank." They're like, "Why aren't you hiring like five more, marketers then? Like let's get these numbers up, right?" And they can put you down a path that maybe, like you said, is not the most efficient. Maybe doesn't allow you to really properly understand the customers because you're focused so much on scaling,
And
right?
I think today, in the age of AI, there are many people, founders, investors, that are still playing kind of the old game, right?
Yep.
And now you're seeing very efficient, capital efficient teams with 2 to 3 people that are actually able to hit some pretty impressive benchmarks. And so if you're playing that old game of, okay, I've just raised $3 million, now I need to hire 12 engineers and I need my office in New York and all these things, you're going to be outpaced by the next company coming out of YC. I can tell you right now. And so you've
Yeah.
got to like, just put those old ways aside and say, okay, this is the new norm of efficiency. And we've got to treat every dollar as the last and also just make it last. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of founders, including in our portfolio, that have gotten a little bit caught, right? So they might have raised a pre-seed, maybe it was like 1.5 million. That was going to get them, to a metric. Maybe they faltered a little bit. Now they're kind of in, no man's land where maybe they have 500K ARR. It's not really enough to raise a seed because there's so many companies that are doing 1 million. And so no one kind of wants to bridge them. And so they're in this like, tricky spot. And so you have to think about, am I raising enough that I can get to that metric that will allow
Yeah.
me to raise that next round, and really work backwards and be very kind of specific about what you need to achieve.
And is capital efficiency something? I mean, I know it's been a buzzword across the industry now, basically just since kind of the bottom fell out in 2002, 2003. But for you guys, is that something that you're really looking at in your companies, um, plotting out, saying, okay, with this round, will you have that 24 to 30 months? And are you spending in a way that will allow you, realistically, you may need to do a pivot, like, just to get to those points, to get to that next round?
100%. Like we are very, insistent about reviewing and really understanding a financial model and an operating model with our founders, not because we believe it's right, but because we kind of want to understand the assumptions and the thinking. And we think that that's like really important. So I'd say, actually, we just went over this with the analysts on our team this morning. So, the big ones are obviously, the burn. We have to understand, does this
Yep.
provide 18, 24, 30 months of runway? That's very important. What's the OpEx for the team? Like, are their salaries, are they taking minimal salaries? Are they taking, salaries that are pretty high? And then I think another great thing for you to benchmark your company is like, what's projected revenue per employee, right? So I can only add an employee if that
Yep.
employee is going to, be paid for by the increase in revenue. And so that's an exercise that we find many founders don't actually do. And they say, well, but we're not really sure where the revenue is going to hit and we need that ramp up time. We'll do that exercise. And I think that'll be like very enlightening to you. And if you always think of your team as kind of a cost center, right? That needs
Yeah.
to be, justified by an end result of revenue or traction in some way. That's like a really different way of framing it. So it's a thought exercise. I'm not, telling anyone that's how you should run your company, but I do think it's an interesting lever that you have and metric that you should kind of understand. And so we find it very impressive when founders can kind of, they know these numbers off off like they just know them. They don't even have to look stuff up because they're so focused on efficiency.
So we have a couple minutes left here, and this has been amazing. So thank you, Jenny. A lot of great nuggets here. This is a question, sort of an extension of, okay, let's think. Maybe it's not efficiency necessarily, but I know, and I just saw something pop up in my feed this morning, like from solo founders, that there's been a push now, probably driven by the AI age, right? Of, okay, is our solo founders kind of making a comeback, so to speak, right? And Elisante from Tanzania is asking, like, for you guys, is that something that plays a large part, if it is a solo founder, in your evaluation of a company?
I mean, I'll be honest, I've changed my tune on this. I used to think
Oh,
solo founders were a bit of a liability. I ran two companies, like I know how hard it is. But I've, kind of watched and been educated and, seen successes with one founder, with multiple founders. And so I don't actually think there is one way. So we don't really have a bias. I'd say the one person team is probably not for us. That might be the future, right? Everyone's talking about the one person $1 billion team. That's not where we want to spend our time right now. We want to invest in teams that are building together to change the world. And so I think that you need a foundational team to do that. So if you're a solo founder and you have two folks that complement your skill set on the team, and they're incentivized with equity, I think that's fine as well. So I've kind of changed my tune. It's very specific. I think, doing these things all by yourself, running a company by yourself is hard and lonely. And so you do need thought partners. You need people with real skin in the game to help you. But who those people are, maybe they don't need to be co-founders. And we've obviously seen the other
Right.
side of having co-founders is that relationships are hard and sometimes those blow up, and that's not good either. So I think it's very specific to the person. The one other thing I'll say about efficiency though, and where we spend a fair amount of time when we meet founders is like, are you running an AI native internal playbook? So your company may not be building LLMs or vector databases or things that are LL native, but are you an AI first company? And that's super important. And when we don't see it, we don't see that you're using the latest tools and that you're not kind of activating an efficient stack. I'd say that's a red flag as well. So I think whether you're a solo founder or not, that's something that you should present to investors, and just really show how efficient you're being using the best software tools.
Right. And I'm glad it's amazing that it's only 5 minutes left and now we're getting to AI. But I'd like to, and there's been a couple comments in here too. Right. And I know that you've been out there quoted like AI is an enabling technology. It's not the business itself. Right. Despite every single company literally just going, oh, we need to put AI on the first slide. Like, right. The AI, is AI on this slide? Is AI on this slide?
Yeah,
Um, it's an enabling technology, right? But like you said, it's even deeper. So you guys are looking into it as how are you using AI across sort of your technology stack to be as efficient as possible across all of your various your business operations, right? That's something that you're analyzing in depth now, just as a gauge of okay, how in tune are they on the tools? How are they thinking about the business? How efficient are they building it from the ground up?
it's really important to us. I mean,
No.
again, we think most companies have, some type of AI angle. You kind of have
Yeah.
to right now. Are those AI native companies? Not really. So an AI
No.
native company is really creating a new market using AI as opposed to using it as an enabler for themselves and also for customers, right? So we're mostly investing at the application layer, which is kind of the ladder. And we really want to make sure that founders are up to speed on the latest tools, and that they can really serve their customers in the best possible, most efficient way. And that's, using the best software. So again, we're looking for founders that want to solve, big problems in the world. We're primarily investing across healthcare, fintech, future of work, climate, kind of big categories. And are they using the best enabling technology, which as we've seen, so there's cloud, that might be right for you. There's crypto, that might be the right rails for you. There's AI, and probably you're using some type of, cocktail of all of these.
Yep.
Doesn't necessarily make you an AI company. And so that's, I think, maybe the point.
It's something that I saw recently in a pitch deck too, where it was the same thing. It wasn't an AI company, right? It was they were solving a problem for a customer, and AI was part of it. But they specifically had a slide about how they were using AI in the business to be more
That's great.
efficient. Now, they
I
didn't
love that.
necessarily call it like how we're using AI to be efficient, but it was like we're an AI first organization, right? And they were showing from the ground up like their stack, how different departments are using it and how it's helping them be more efficient. And I saw that and I'm like, okay, this is probably going to be something I'm going to start to see a lot more often.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
And fun fact, like we also have to raise capital, and I also have a deck, and I also talk to stakeholders, and we have that slide in our deck too,
Yeah.
of how we're using AI internally. So I think everyone really should have that.
Yeah, every company is basically going to be not necessarily an AI company, but it's going to be a fundamental thing in the same way that everybody's using cloud services. Doesn't mean you're a cloud company, but it just helps you be more efficient and it helps you drive more value. Um, I think, yeah, and there was a question I want to have here. Then I want to get to a final question, and then we'll wrap up this conversation, which has been amazing, Jenny. Um, are you guys looking specifically more? So Abala was asking, like, how disadvantaged is the founder if they're raising sort of a non-AI SaaS company in the current environment? And at least something, when you typically see these, it's cyclical, right? When you see these venture pullbacks the last couple of years, what happens? People start to pull back from markets that maybe aren't traditional, right? And I think another thing is people start to pull back from investments. I mean, generally, the investments that may be seen as a little bit more risky. SaaS in general is just something that investors tend to love because it's consistent, easy to forecast, et cetera. Is that something where you've been seeing any change in the appetite for SaaS? Is that like, how do you guys look at that in terms of like the balance of your portfolio?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, one things I would encourage founders to do is to like step outside of their day to day and just kind of survey the landscape. So I'd say for the last year, the number of pitches I get around workflow automation is at like a crazy high where it's like there just can't be that many workflow automation companies because there has to be consolidation, there has to be efficiencies of scale. All these companies cannot be successful, but I'm not sure that all these companies know about each other. So I'd encourage you
Right.
to like get out there and see what's happening. So I don't think it's about SaaS or non-SaaS. I think it's about finding pockets of opportunity where you can, use AI in a way and have, a sense of a defensible moat. Now, really, your only moat is your distribution. So if you can credibly say, like, our distribution model, the way our flywheel, our pipeline, the reason that we can get there first, well, that's something that makes, people perk up. If you're a workflow automation for, internal tools and whatnot, there's so many of these. And every day, Gemini and OpenAI are producing more of these. And so you have to literally ask yourself, at what point is this going to be displaced? Do I think it's going to be displaced? So I think that they're natural categories to kind of worry about. And then there's some, I mean, I would say like logistics, manufacturing, like these types of areas. I mean, I think they're ripe for efficient solutions using AI and having a SaaS business model. And it's unclear that, the LLMs are going to like, displace that type of application. So it's not like a very clear answer, but I'd say the best thing is like things are changing so fast that you just have to kind of make sure that you're seeing what's happening and that you're seeing it in aggregate so that you can get more informed about the possible longevity of your company, which is, it's kind of like a harsh thing to say, but a reality.
And especially, just I want to point out too, what you're saying is like with AI workflows, right? Because I'm seeing so many pitch decks, and they're all focused on, hey, we can use this AI to do really cool stuff. It's like, yeah, I know AI can help people do really cool stuff, right? And there's a lot of different use cases that we know it's going to do that, but it's the ones that can actually show how are you actually going to get to the customer at scale,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
What's your go to market? How is that differentiated and defensible? Well, that's interesting, right? Not just that we
Yeah.
create an agentic, workflow. So again, think about the end result and how you're going to get there. And to me, that's what's unique about your company.
Right. Awesome. So I have one final question, Jenny, and this is
Okay.
similar to a question that I like to ask always when we wrap these things up, right? Because I
Oh
always
boy.
find that it usually gets some interesting advice, right? But it's you talk to so many founders, you just spent a whole bunch of time in Europe. You're everywhere ventures. So you're literally everywhere talking to founders, all different types of cultures, all different types of businesses all the time, right? And I'm sure there's a piece of advice that you give to founders a lot that you're probably like sort of sick of hearing yourself say it, but it's so important and you think that even though you're saying it so much to founders that a lot of them are still sort of missing the mark. Is there any specific piece of advice that you think comes to mind as we wrap up our combo?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the big one because most people lean on me for fundraising advice is, understand that the market is challenging, and put
Oh,
yourself in the best position by doing work ahead of time, and that might be a few months ahead of time. Kind of qualifying who the best investors are, creating your data room, making sure your materials are just top notch, and I think then you'll be in much better shape to get introductions, build your investor pipeline, and just realize that you're going to need more top of the funnel. So I'd say, my advice is just it's harder than it was before. So you're going to be more buttoned up, more prepared, and you're going to have to do more pitches. And so, like, just get started today, even if you're not raising.
all right, it's not too early to get started.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jenny. Jenny, this has been really, really enlightening. If we can get some virtual applause from the crowd, there it is. Some hearts, some
So good.
hands.
There's
Yeah.
so many questions in the comments. I'm sorry I couldn't get to them. I'll have to come back, Jonathan, but it's always
Y-
so fun to be part of the the Founder Institute community, and all the work that you guys are doing really aligns with our mission as well. So thanks for having me, and yeah, this is just a great session.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And I know we put her LinkedIn in there, guys, as well, if you want to connect with them. Everywhere.vc, great URL, right? Or is it everywhereventures.vc or everywhere.vc?
Everywhere.vc, but
Yeah, perfect. Great.
everywhereventures.com works as well. But
Yeah.
pretty easy to find. I'd say for hot tips, definitely follow me on Twitter because I give a lot of interesting nuggets on what I'm seeing on the ground. So it's JE Fielding. And yeah, otherwise like LinkedIn for kind of longer, more thoughtful posts.
Awesome. Okay.
All right,
Thank you
guys.
so much, Jenny. Thank you
Thank
for taking the
you.
time. I know you have a busy schedule, so thank you so much. That was amazing.
Talk to you soon. Bye.